Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
As I have shared on this podcast, I'm an introvert. I do like talking to people. I guess maybe I'm an omnivert, but I do like just sitting at home. My wife was out of town for a week, and I just went home every day and just hung out. Didn't really care if I talked to anybody, and that's just really who I am and what I'm about, and I'm okay with that. I know that's kind of conflicted with what people think the type of work that I do, the type of business that I have. So while I'm an introvert, I like to talk to other introverts and see how they manage things and how they help other people. Today I have on Alan Heyman, and he has a knack for coaching fellow introverts, helping them find their way, their superpower in an extroverted world. And to be honest, a lot of it is out there. It's geared for extroverts. I mean, they're just, there are networking events with lots of people. They don't have networking events for two people. They have lots of people. And he specializes in coaching through transition. To date, he's coached leaders who were born in, he claims this here, he's born in 32 countries, and he's done work on 4 different continents. And he does work with large corporations, Fortune 50 corporations, not-for-profit organizations, public utilities. He's in the DC area, so he's probably got his fair share of federal, county, and municipal type work as well. He's also an author. He wrote a book called Don't Just Have the Soup, which is 52 analogies for leadership. Spent more than 2 decades in public, government, not-for-profit communications. He has a law degree. Got that JD. I see that JD. That means Juris Doctor, for those who don't know. And he's led teams from 2 to 100 people. He's the founder of an organization called Peaceful Directions. He founded that back in 2019. Alan, welcome to the program. Thanks for coming out of your shell and sharing with us.
Frank, it's great to be here with you and your audience, and I'm still in the bunker even as I join you, right?
Okay, yeah, there you go. Yeah, well, it's just one-on-one. It's lots of people are listening, but it's just one-on-one, so you can handle it. Well, I guess give me your journey. I mean, it's you before we hit record, you shared that you went to law school at night and you were working in government, and then when you were done with law school, you did the very safe thing of going back to work for government. You didn't want to practice law, and I, as a former attorney, I get that. But how did you transition out of that to doing the coaching work that you do now?
Sure. So to rewind the clock just a little bit before law school, I went to journalism school for undergraduate, and I worked as a local news reporter in my native home state of Illinois, and found my way out to DC and was eventually doing communications work for government agencies and nonprofits. And that's when I was in school at night.
Okay.
It was during one of those nonprofit communication jobs, the biggest one that I had, that I realized I needed some pretty serious support in my role if I was going to succeed. So I ended up hiring a coach, which is how I ultimately learned what coaching was and what it could deliver. So fast forward a few years, I actually had the opportunity to go to coaching school, and I did. And I realized what I wanted to do was deliver a little bit of that magic that my coach was able to do for me to lots of clients. And so took on my own business and went to work for myself for the first time after 20 plus years of working for other people.
Yeah.
And absolutely love it. This has been like no other journey I've had professionally in my life. And every day is different. And really just enjoy getting to know the different situations and industries that my clients find themselves in every day.
Yeah. Now, that's Peaceful Directions, correct?
Yes, that's the name of my coaching company, Peaceful Direction.
Okay. And it launched in April 2019.
Yes.
And of course, we went into a pandemic, 8 months later, a lockdown. Was that Good for business, bad for business? I could see it being good for business for what you
I
do.
I am honestly not sure how to answer your question.
Okay.
And the reason is I didn't have a baseline year before
Oh,
the
true.
pandemic.
Yeah.
So what I'll tell you is that I started the business and was doing almost all of my coaching from day one virtually. So those dozens of countries that you mentioned, I was able to serve without leaving my house in Maryland. And to this day, in a more or less post-pandemic world, I
Hmm.
will travel for work about once a month. I will occasionally do facilitations in person in live space, but almost all of my coaching work still is virtual. So I will also tell you that at the beginning of the pandemic, and certainly at its height, given all of the changes that were taking place in the way we work, clients had a lot to talk about. So
Yeah.
I feel like it was a very fortunate moment to come into this work full time, while it was an unfortunate set of circumstances for almost everybody around the world.
Yeah. I just think the reason and again, you don't have a baseline. The reason I think it would be good for you is exactly that reason. There were a lot of people, I can speak for myself, just trying to talk people off the ledge, metaphorically speaking. People who were in business. And I remember one guy I was talking to him in the evening. I thought he was, I, he, I thought he was suicidal. It's like my business is falling apart and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you just got to hang in there. You just got to hang in there. It's nobody knew, how long this was going to go. And then I tentatively called him the next day just to check on him. And I said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "No, I'm great." Overnight, the governor had declared that his industry, he was an exterminator. His
Mm,
industry was an essential business, right? He was going to be busier he never could have been. But there was we all went through that fleeting moment where like, okay, what does this mean? And I told my wife, I'm just really scared to call this guy. But anyhow, um, you help introverts. You help them find their superpower in an extroverted world. Let's really dive into that.
yeah. One of my favorite topics. So it's not a dirty word anymore. It's not something that we need to see as a disability or an obstacle or something that we have to manage or manage through. I really do
Yeah.
truly think of it as a superpower because we see the world differently. We engage with the world differently. And if there's one thing we now know about leadership that's more obvious than ever before, it's that you need a variety of perspectives around the table. You can't
Hmm.
have a group of leaders in an organization who are all wired the same way, because that is how blind spots develop and that is how mistakes are made. So if you want the person who's going to think a little bit before speaking, if you want the person who's going to be an engaged and active listener who's really going to see and hear people for who they are, if you want the person who's going to be prepared coming into decision-making processes, that's your introvert. And plenty of great leaders throughout our history, especially recent history, were probably introverts. It's just that you don't think of it that way when you see them on a stage, giving a captivating talk in front of thousands of people, or making great change in society. Because I think there has been historically this notion that we fade into the background, or we're shy, or misanthropic, or we don't like people.
Yeah.
And some of those things are true, but not always. To me, introversion has always been an expression of how we get our energy. And I enjoy conversation. I enjoy people. I talk to people for a living. This is what I do. And I also know that it comes at an energy cost. And it's energy I will gladly spend in service of a great conversation, a great client, a great event, a great activity. But I know I have to build in that recovery time. Just like you
Yeah.
plug in your cell phone at the end of the day, I need my solo time. You mentioned it when you had that week away, when your family was away. I need solitude, just about as much as I would imagine food, water, and oxygen at this point. If I'm going to
Yeah.
be mentally healthy, it's a required component of my life.
Yeah. Now, everything you say resonates with me. What I have noticed about extroverts is they interrupt a lot, right? It's like I find that if I just take a pause to kind of choose my word, it's almost like a signal to them, like, all right, he's done. My
Yes.
turn. I only got a half a sentence out. I only answered half your question. And part of that's on me because I do try to choose my words carefully, and I just need to be a little more assertive in saying, wait a minute, I'm not done. You got to let
Mhm.
me speak. But I've often said that I think introverts, and you call it a superpower, introverts have an advantage because they do shut up and listen. They do take in a lot of information. I have a stable of franchisees, and I can see the introverts, the people who might call me later with their own 2 cents. They won't say it in a group, right? They don't want to. They don't want that. They don't want to be in the group, but they are very deliberate in their thinking, I guess is the best way to put it.
Absolutely. And I think this is something to be aware of for those of us who convene groups, for those of us who facilitate meetings, and I do this for a living as well. Um, Look out for the people who are not the first to speak.
Yeah.
Look out for the people who might be a little bit reluctant even, and bring them forward, because you're going to get great ideas. You're going to get thoughtful stuff. And it's your job as the convener to create the safety for everyone to feel free to come forward versus the people who automatically come forward first.
Yeah, no, it's very true. I mean, some people, I just wonder if it's like a shark, right? A shark's got to keep moving to breathe. I mean, there's just people out there. It's like, I've got to be talking. I've got to be around people or else I'm going to die. And that's not everybody. So how do you help introverts? You know, what sorts of things do you know, I mean, it's more than just saying, okay, you're an introvert, deal with it. It's an extroverted world. You know, what are some of the things that you're kind of coaching them on?
I'll give you an example that kind of brings together the two areas of specialty that I work with a lot, one being introverts and the other being career transitions. So if you're going to undertake a career transition, it means, by definition, you're leaving what you know. You're leaving your comfort zone.
Yeah.
That is hard. That is where a coach can help. And part of the difficulty I find, especially with my fellow introverts, is there's this vulnerability that comes with putting yourself out there. There's this vulnerability that comes from going to your existing network of people and saying, hello, remember me? I'm interested in doing something different now. Here is why that matters. Here is why you should care. And here is why I am asking you for help. That's hard, but it's essential. So I work with a lot of my clients on how to get through that sort of self-imposed limitation, that kind of icky feeling of all of it, because it's necessary and it works. The idea that you will find your magical new position, your start to your new career, by sending out 400 cold applications on LinkedIn is not a thing that works in most sectors of the economy that I'm aware of. It is about relationships. It is about connections. It's about that person you worked with 15 years ago, and you're afraid they're not going to remember your name, but they think fondly of you. And you know what? Their neighbor next door is starting a new company and needs some help. That's how the process works.
Yeah.
It does not require putting yourself out there and having extended conversations with a bunch of strangers. But it does require putting yourself out there some. And getting your head in that game can be a challenge. And that's something that a coach can support with.
Yeah. I use the metaphor or analogy. I don't know if I'm right or wrong on this, but it's like all roads connect, right? I mean, you can pretty much get from Nome, Alaska to the very tip of South America because all roads are connected. And it's the same thing with our networks. And so often people think of networking as, okay, who is the perfect person I need to connect with? And they put all that brain power into thinking who that perfect person is, rather than just stepping forward and saying, you know what, I'm just going to act and I'm going to meet somebody. And I'm going to develop a relationship, and just trusting that that road is connected to the person you need to be with. And somehow or another, it always works out.
It takes time. It takes energy. It does work. And I think also, if you are giving people a request that they can't possibly refuse, that's the way to go.
Right.
Ask for 5 minutes of time. Ask for a connection to another person that that you'd like to know. These are not hard requests to fulfill, versus the idea that you're going to call up a complete stranger or somebody you haven't talked to in forever and ask them for a job right away. That is also not how it works.
Yeah.
But it's a process and it takes time. And I think of a career search actually as a series of small failures that leads to one big success, because you're going to have those no-shows. You're going to have those no responses. You're going to have those interviews where you don't get the job.
Yeah.
And then ultimately you do, and you're successful. Takes time and energy, but it is a process that is well worth investing in. And I also think it's worth noting that you're not putting somebody out by making a request like this. So back when I was a hiring manager and back when I managed teams of people, uh, things like this would come across my desk fairly often. Can you introduce me to so and so? Can you make a referral to this organization? If I do that, and if I extend a little bit of my credibility for you and it goes well, it reflects well on me and everybody
Yeah.
wins.
Yeah.
Versus this idea that by asking me for this, I'm doing you some sort of a favor or I'm putting myself out somehow. Go ahead and ask, because if they don't want to do it, odds are they're either going to tell you no or they won't respond, which is fine. But I think that most people will.
No, I agree. I think we all want to help, and there are people out there. What would you tell the person you're working with? And these are probably introverts, because the extroverts are they're feckless, right? I mean, they'll hear no, and they don't hear no, they just keep going, right? Which is probably a good thing. But the introvert who hears no and then right away says, well, that's not going to work. I know you told me to reach out and ask for time, but they said no. And I'm going to extrapolate that across everybody, the entire human population. Nobody wants to talk to me.
Absolutely. I imagine it along the lines of some kind of an event that you might host where you want a certain number of people to attend, and you know that to get that number of people to attend, you have to invite well beyond that number of people.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Kind of like that. If you're going to get people to return your phone calls and respond to your inquiries, you've got to be prepared for no. You're putting yourself out there. And you only need a couple to really ride with you during that process and support you along the way to get what you need. But it's going to start with a big, broad group of people, and you may end up having a few dozen of these types of conversations before you focus in on who you need to talk to and what exactly you're looking for. So the first step is definitely going to involve a lot of no.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I remember when I was leaving public accounting and going into private practice, trying to figure out my way. And I grew up, my father was a professor. My mom and stepmom were teachers. They were all educators. And government paid your money, you know what I mean? It was the whole notion of starting a business was very, very foreign. And just getting those first few no's and kind of, again, thinking, oh my gosh, this is, maybe I'm not worthy. But I entered into it with the mindset that, got a law degree, I got an MBA, I got a CPA at this point. Who wouldn't want to hire me? Why is my phone not ringing? Why is it not happening?
Yeah.
I wasn't inviting enough people into my party, to use your metaphor.
Yeah, you weren't hoisting the flag. And I think those of us who run independent small businesses are especially attuned to this, because when I have a conversation with a potential coaching client, it's like having multiple little tiny job interviews every year.
Right.
And I kind of enjoy that process because it's very iterative, and I'm also getting the sense of whether somebody is right to work with me. And for me, the stakes are not as high as having that interview for that job that I might keep for 10 years and have that be my only occupation.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this is fascinating stuff. Success stories. Well, I guess what can you tell us? I don't want to say any success story, but something unusual that really comes to mind.
Sure. So a couple of years back, when I started down this road of really focusing on career transition coaching services for clients, had a referral, took on a client who had been working in the same organization in more or less the same role for about 20 years, maybe a little bit longer. It had turned toxic for him. It was not a good situation anymore. He wanted out, but he didn't know how to begin any kind of a process. And he also didn't know what he wanted. So it was a bad situation for him because he really had enjoyed the job at one point, but was long past those days. Probably could have done it a year earlier.
Yeah.
So one of the first things we did, and I certified as a coach with the guys who wrote Designing Your Life, which is a great book by the Stanford design folks out of California. And in the process that I learned in part of this certification, what you do is you sit down and you rewrite your job as if it's perfect for you right now. Not when you got it, not when you got promoted, but right this minute, if you rewrote your job description so it had only the elements that worked for you right now, what would that look like? So he wrote out his list and he realized, one, there were elements of his job that he enjoyed. And two, the elements of his job that were really valuable to his employer were not those elements. So there was a disconnect there.
Mm-hmm.
And he decided he was going to walk away and he was going to spend time with his wife and his dogs and work on the house and get some rest and do all these things that he had been putting off for himself. And we walked through the process of how do you have the conversation, resigning your job. So Friday afternoon, he goes to the office, turns in his laptop, gives his notice. Monday morning, his phone rings, and it is a client of the organization where he had worked for the past 20 plus years, offering him a job that was more or less the entire list of things on his ideal job description. And he said, that's really flattering. Thank you for calling. And I want you to know I'm only interested in working part-time and I want to take a month off. And they said, totally fine. Call us when you're ready. We'll be ready for you. So I would like to think that all of this is because of the magic of coaching and that, I'm a phenomenal human being as a coach. And maybe all of that is true. What I do know for sure is that the process of sitting down and listing out these responsibilities as he would have them opened his mind to the possibility.
Yeah.
And there is a link between that and the job that he was offered.
No, I'm a firm believer. My wife and I, the house we have now, we love, bought it 20 some years ago now. And, we were just driving around looking at houses. Nothing kind of floated our boat. And we were kind of, let's just sit down and map out what we want. Boop, 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 boop. Mapped it all out. That weekend, coming home from soccer with the kids, it's like for sale by owner. Let's go see what this is. Boom, there it was.
All the things.
Yeah, it was all the things. And the people were like floored because their house literally sold in 3 days. He said, the house we're building's not ready yet. Okay, it's okay. We have to sell our house. You just, we'll just lease it back to you, but we want the house. So, but it was all just kind of mapping it out and just kind of getting clear in our mind as to what we were looking for. Question about who do you think has more trouble in transition? Well, maybe it's not a question, I'm answering it, but I would think people who are introverts have more trouble being in job transition than extroverts. Because extroverts are out there, they're making it happen, they're talking to people, and they're doing the things that I guess you're kind of coaching people to do.
Maybe so. Maybe it needs to be a little bit more of a thoughtful, deliberate process for the introvert.
Sure.
But I could see the flip side of it as well, where, if you are the sort of person who's always out there, always having the conversation, always, let's say, being the first in any group to share your opinion, that could overwhelm a new audience of people at a new employer. So to the extent that the introvert might be more naturally inclined to hang back and listen and take it in and absorb context clues and get to know an environment, that might be helpful. Mm-hmm. I think the risk is you need to know when to pivot and when listening and taking in time is over and when it's time to actually push out there. And that's where you might need to have a little bit of a nudge. So I could see both the introvert and the extrovert having challenges with that in different directions and at different times.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. Let's shift gears a little bit. Just you've kind of touched on it, but talk about your practice, people listening, how they could help you, and how they could reach you, I guess, as well.
Absolutely. So I do facilitation for groups of people who work in organizations. I do a fair amount of my coaching work on contract for large coaching companies and other organizations and in connection with other coaches. And then I also have private clients as well. And that's where I spend most of my time on those specialties of introverts and leaders in transition. A lot of my work is, let's say, directors on up. But I've also done some cohort learning experiences for emerging leaders, and I enjoy working in that space too. So my business is Peaceful Direction. That's peacefuldirection.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, which is the only social media that I use at the moment. Probably on there more than I ought to be, but definitely happy to engage with folks if they want to send me a DM over on LinkedIn as well.
All right, certainly. I'll get I will get the web address in the show notes for sure. I really appreciate your time today. This has been fascinating. Give a high five to Rachel. Well, she's virtual. Tell her thank you for connecting us.
Yeah, absolutely, Frank. It's been great to connect with you as well, and love the idea that there's this space that you've created for people to get together. It's so necessary.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AMSPIRIT.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.